From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Rob Casper. I am the head of the Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress, and it is my great honor to introduce our next reader, Philip Levine, who served as the 18th Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry and as the real head of our center over the past year. Words cannot describe what Phil has meant to me as both a poet and a person. In this, I am not alone. And they agree with me. So many have found solace and wisdom in the work Phil has committed to for over half a century. His poetry has earned him the Pulitzer Prize, 2 National Book Awards, and 2 National Book Critics Circle Awards, and countless other honors. It is worth noting today in this pavilion hosted by the National Endowment for the Arts that Phil not only received 3 NEA Literature Fellowships himself, but in 1984 chaired the NEA's Literature Board. One example of his lifelong commitment to the art and his generosity towards its practitioners. He is the only poet I know whose teaching is so legendary that his students have a group name, the Fresno School, for the Central California city Phil lived in and the state university he taught at for 34 years. Indeed, got some California people in the house. And more than any other poet I know, Phil is a man of singular integrity. He's not the kind of person to rest on his laurels, though his laurels are many, or accept easy answers. And the same is true of his poems, essays, and translations. His is an ennobling work, especially when it contends with the baser realities of humankind. In language as artful as it is direct, Phil's writing gives us something to believe in, something to make good on. The simple truth is, I will live a long time before I fully understand how much he and his writing have inspired me. And I share this great good fortune with countless others, including you. Please join me in welcoming Philip Levine.
Well, thank you, Rob, for your eloquent, though inaccurate description of me. I'm not that nice a person. And if there's anybody in the audience who knows me, they can give you many examples of what a chicken guy I am. But I love poetry, and I've been at it, oh God, I hate to tell you how long. Yesterday, I met 5 young people who are sort of junior poet laureates of America. They're high school students. The oldest was 18, the youngest was 16. And I was talking to them. I was brought there to help honor them. And I thought, it took me 83 years to become a poet laureate. And here was one at 16. Come on! Okay. All right, let me read some poems. I'm from Detroit, and Detroit is a major issue in my poems, as it was a major issue in my life. And I'm going back next week to visit it, actually to look for it. Some of it is probably still there. And I was an industrial worker before I became a rich poet. So this is about work, this poem. It's about a particular woman who I worked with for a year. And I can't exaggerate the fascination she was for me. She was kind of a person I'd never met before. There was something so direct and muscular about her approach to life. and Andra looks, which was startling. It's called Coming Close. It takes place in a factory where we produced tubing for plumbing and also plated the tubing. Coming Close. Take this quiet woman. She has been standing before a polishing wheel for over 3 hours, and she lacks 20 minutes before she can take a lunch break. Is she a woman? Consider the arms as they press the long brass tube against the buffer. They are striated along the triceps, the 3 heads of which clearly show. Consider the fine dusting of dark down above the upper lip and the beads of sweat that run from under the red kerchief across the brow and are wiped away with a blackening wristband. In one odd motion, a child might make to say, no, no. You must come closer to find out. You must hang your tie and jacket in one of the lockers in favor of a black smock. You must be prepared to spend shift after shift hauling off the metal trays of stock, bowing first, knees bent for a purchase, then lifting with a gasp, the first word of tenderness between the two of them. Then you must bring new trays of dull, unpolished tubes. You must feed her, as they say in the language of the place. Make no mistake, the place has a language. And if by some luck the power were cut, the wheel slowed to a stop so that you suddenly saw it was not a solid object, but so many separate bristles forming in motion a perfect circle, she would turn to you and say, why? Not the old why of, why must I spend 5 nights a week? Just why? Even if by some magic you knew, you wouldn't dare speak for fear of her laughter, which now you have anyway, as she places the 5 tapering fingers of her filthy hand on the arm of your white shirt to mark you for your own, now and forever. And let me read another poem from this book, What Work Is. This book is an incredible bargain. You get this Louis Hine photograph, which would cost you a fortune. And I can write Louis Hine on it if you'd like. And then you cut it out, and the cover has a white blank space, which then becomes the most beautiful portion of the book. Empty space filled with the words of eternity. Yesterday I heard a young woman named Kristen Dupard from Mississippi recite this poem to me, my poem. She had won a competition. I think it's called Poetry Out Loud. She became the national champion reciting my poem. And I was enormously touched by the fact that an 18-year-old woman would have wandered into my poetry. And reading it, I think she understood it. She read it better than I will. And I think she understood it better than I did. I mean, she transformed it into the terms of her own life. And it may have had more meaning for an 18-year-old woman than it had for me when I wrote it as a 50-year-old man. Fort Highland Park is mentioned. That is that was the second largest Ford assembly plant. Highland Park is a little city inside the city of Detroit. There are 2 cities, Hamtramck and Highland Park. You can read about them in Dante. They are little circles, and it's not in the Paradiso. What work is? We stand in the rain in a long line. waiting at Ford Highland Park for work. You know what work is. If you're old enough to read this, you know what work is, although you may not do it. Forget you. This is about waiting, shifting from one foot to another, feeling the light rain falling like mist into your hair, blurring your vision. Do you think you see your own brother ahead of you? Maybe 10 places. You rub your glasses with your fingers, and of course, it's someone else's brother. Narrower across the shoulders than yours, but with the same sad slouch. The grin that does not hide the stubbornness, the sad refusal to give in to rain, to the hours wasted waiting, to the knowledge that somewhere ahead a man is waiting who will say, no, we're not hiring today, for any reason he wants. You love your brother. Now suddenly you can hardly stand the love flooding you for your brother, who's not beside you or behind or ahead, because he's home trying to sleep off a miserable night shift at Cadillac, so he can get up before noon to study his German. Works 8 hours a night so he can sing Wagner, the opera you hate most, the worst music ever invented. How long has it been since you told him you loved him? Held his wide shoulders, opened your eyes wide, and said those words, and maybe kissed his cheek. You've never done something so simple, so obvious. Not because you're too young or too dumb, not because you're jealous or even mean, or incapable of crying in the presence of another man. No, just because you don't know what work is. I see you take after Rob, who's very generous. Let me change the tone and read a poem about another subject dear to my heart, gin. Not the game, not the card game, but the beverage. I have a long history with gin. I'd say a longer one with scotch. I'm not from the pot generation. I tried it, and it just made the room smell. I remember once somebody slipped me acid in a glass of gin and orange juice, and I didn't know what happened. I thought, this is the strangest gin. And finally, he saw me standing there going, and he said to me, what are you seeing? And I said, you see the ceiling? It's so aggressive. Fortunately, I stuck with it and never tried it again. Gin. The first time I drank gin, I thought it must be hair time. My brother swiped the bottle from a guy whose father owned a drugstore that sold booze in those ancient, honorable days when we acknowledged the stuff was a drug. 3 of us passed the bottle around, each tasting with disbelief. People paid for this? People had to have it the way we had to have the women we never got near? Actually, they were girls. But never mind, the important fact was their impenetrability. Leo, the third foolish partner, suggested my brother should have swiped Canadian whiskey or brandy. But Eddie defended his choice on the grounds of the expressions gin house and gin lane, both of which indicated the preeminence of gin in the world of drinking, a world we were entering without understanding how difficult exit might be. Maybe the bliss that came with drinking came only after a certain period of apprenticeship. Eddie likened it to the holy man's self-flagellation to experience the fullness of faith. He was very well read for a kid of 14 in the public schools. So we dug in and passed the bottle around a second time, and then a third, in the silence, each of us expecting some transformation. You get used to it, Leo said. You don't like it, but you get used to it. I know now that brain cells were dying for no earthly purpose. That 3 boys were becoming increasingly despiritualized, even as they took into themselves these spirits. But I thought then I was at last sharing the world with the movie stars. That before long I would be shaving because I needed to. That hair would sprout across the flat prairie of my chest and plunge even to my groin. And that first girls and then women would be drawn to my qualities. Amazingly, later some of this took place. But first, the bottle had to be empty. And then the 3 boys had to empty themselves of all they had so painfully taken in. And by means even more painful, as they bowed by turns over the eye of the toilet bowl to discharge their shame. Ahead lay cigarettes, the futility of guaranteed programs of exercise, the elaborate lies of conquest no one believed, forms of sexual torture and rejection undreamed of. Ahead lay our 15th birthdays, acne, deodorants, crabs, salves, butch haircuts, draft registration, the military and political victories of Dwight Eisenhower, who brought us Richard Nixon with wife and dog. Any wonder we tried gin? This is a somewhat newer book, and so I'm even more bitter. I mean, age does not make you wise. It makes you slow. And other things. I mean, it's true, my life is easier. Because I ask so little of myself. I mean, if I get through the day, I say, terrific. And I only have to now measure myself against my wife, who's my age. Every year, it seems, with one exception, one of my poems appears in an anthology called Best Spiritual Writing. And I do not think of myself as a very spiritual person. Well, you've heard the poems, they don't seem that spiritual. But somebody thinks they are, and I'm happy that this fellow feels that way. If he's in the room today, keep taking them. This is the one spiritual poem, the year he didn't take anything, which I forgive him. It's called Houses in Order. And I know we are in Washington, D.C. The Williamsburg Bridge, as you may know, goes from Manhattan to Brooklyn, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And on good days, it actually goes from Williamsburg to Manhattan. And you can spend half your life getting to Manhattan, unless you take the subway, which also runs across. Houses in order. In cardboard boxes under the Williamsburg Bridge, a congregation of mature rats founds a new order based on the oldest religious principle. They eat whatever they can get their teeth into. By day, they move slowly about their kingdom. Some days so slowly they seem for hours on end to become holy relics, or the stained brown backgrounds to events foretold in parables, to do with the savor of salt, the mysteries of mustard seeds, meat, bones, loaves, and fishes. When you look back, they've gone into water or air. They've joined the falling rain that makes vision so difficult, even for the visionary. The little houses keep their secrets the way windowless houses always do, though their walls and roofs proclaim the hour's holy names. Nike and Converse, Panasonic and Walkman. And though they let light leak in through their teeth-torn ports and darkness out from under their lids, they're closed to all but the eyes of the faithful. These dull pilgrims contemplate the business of gathering and hunting while the day hangs on and the traffic drones on the bridge above. Soon the headlights come on singly or in pairs. The rain gleams through the taut cables. No moon rises above the island where now they're among us, each one doing a morsel of God's work until their small jaws ache from so much prayer. I had the good fortune to go to a city college, university actually, Wayne University, the City College of Detroit. It's now called Wayne State because the city went broke. So the state took it over, and pretty soon it will be called Wayne National University when the state goes broke. It was a perfect school for me. I loved it. I loved, some of my colleagues went to fancy, my high school colleagues went to fancy schools, but I was glad I stayed there. It was just the perfect dump for me. I mean, I met people that I could really feel close to. And politically, the spectrum of the students, this is 1946, 7, 8, the spectrum was huge. We had Trotskyites, we had Stalinists, we had the people who would create the Tea Party, we had everything. We even had centrists, and we hissed at centrists. My God. This is called Our Reds, and it is about some of my communist classmates. I give them pseudonyms so they won't be arrested. For all I know, they're not alive anymore. One of them I call Vallejo, after the great Peruvian poet, Cesar Vallejo. And I explain in the poem more or less why. He was a communist, by the way. The woman I call Lupino, after that wonderful movie star and movie director, she was a director, Ida Lupino, because of the similarity of their look. And one I call Two-Card Cohen. He was the only person I ever encountered who actually had 2 party cards and was immensely proud. And I remember one day when McCarthy was crushing certain Americans. He came up to me and he said, "We're in trouble, Phil. The committee is coming here." I said to him, No, you're in trouble." He vanished. Probably changed his name to O'Leary and joined the Tea Party. You know, extremists on both sides of the coin are the same person. Our Reds. Let us bless the 3 wild Reds of our school days. Bless how easily Gaunt Vallejo would lose control, the blood rushing to his depleted face, while his mistress, in a torn trench coat, stroked his padded shoulders to calm him. We'll call him Vallejo after the poet, only because he vaulted into speech in such a headlong rush. In truth, his name was Slovakian. We'll call her Lupino after the film star because she was more beautiful in memory than in fact. Her cheeks drawn over fine bones, her hair tumbling down from under the beret, hair we loved and called dirty blonde. Vallejo would rise in class, unasked, to interrupt the, quote, tired fascist swill the stunned professor was giving out. Quote, "The proper function of a teacher is to inform the unformed cadres of the exploited classes regarding the nature of their enslavement to an estate sold to the masters of the means of production. End quote. Lupino would rise quietly beside him to show solidarity and to begin her therapy. Tutankhamun would join in flashing his party cards for all to see and invoking the sacred triads of Hegel. And we, the unformed and the uninformed, dropped our pencils and groaned with gladness to be quit of Aristotle's ethics or the monetary theories of James K. Polk, and stared into a future of rotund potential fulfilled. They're gone now, the three. Vallejo, Lupino, Cohen, into an America no one wanted, or something even worse. So bless their certainties, their fiery voices we so easily resisted, their tired eyes, their cheeks flushed with sudden blood. Bless their rhetoric, bless their zeal, bless their costumes and their cards, bless their faith in us, especially that faith, that hideous innocence. Oh, yeah. In this poem, I quote a line from F. Scott Fitzgerald. He actually did write it. The Packard was an automobile produced from, I think, the 20s to about 1956. It was a very elegant-looking car, sort of trying to look like a Rolls Royce at 1/10 the price. It was a good car. And the factory went bust after the Second World War. They put fins on it, and it didn't handle very well. It tended to run into the Detroit River. There's a reference to my oldest son trying to escape the American dream. That is, during the Vietnam War, going to Sweden, which he hated, and came back to face the draft. The two, when he gets off work at Packard, they meet outside a diner on Grand Boulevard. He's tired, a bit depressed, and smelling the exhaustion on his own breath, he kisses her carefully on her left cheek. Early April, and the weather has not decided if this is spring, winter, or what. The two gaze upward at the sky, which gives nothing away. The low clouds break here and there and let in tiny slices of a pure blue heaven. The day is like us, she thinks. It hasn't decided what to become. The traffic light at Linwood goes from red to green, and the trucks start up so that when he says, "Would you like to eat?" she hears a jumble of words that mean nothing, though spiced with things she cannot believe. Wouldn't you? And lucky me? He's been up late, she thinks. He's tired of the job, perhaps tired of their morning meetings. But then he bows from the waist and holds the door open for her to enter the diner. And the thick odor of bacon frying and new potatoes greets them both. And taking heart, she enters to peer through the thick cloud of tobacco smoke to see if their booth is available. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that there were no second acts in America. But he knew neither this man nor this woman, and no one else like them. Unless he stayed late at the office to test his famous one-liner, "We keep you clean" in Muscatine, on the woman emptying his wastebasket. Fitzgerald never wrote with someone present, except for this woman, in a gray uniforms whose comings and goings went unnoticed, Even on those December evenings she worked late while the snow fell silently on the windowsills and the new fluorescent lights blinked on and off. Get back to the two, you say. Not who ordered poached eggs, who ordered only toast and coffee, who shared the bacon with the other. But what became of the two when this poem ended? Whose arms held whom? Who first said, I love you, and truly meant it? And who misunderstood the words, so longed for, and yet still so unexpected, and began suddenly to scream and curse until the waitress asked them both to leave? The Packard plant closed years before I left Detroit. The diner was burned to the ground in '67, 2 years before my oldest son fled to Sweden to escape the American dream. And the lovers, you ask? I wrote nothing about lovers. Take a look. Clouds, trucks, traffic lights, a diner, work, a wooden shoe, East Moline, poached eggs, the perfume of frying bacon, the chaos of language, the spices of spent breath after 8 hours of night work. Can you hear all I feared and never dared to write? Why the two are more real than either you or me? Why I never returned to keep them in my life? How little I now mean to myself or anyone else? What any of this could mean? Where you found the patience to endure these truths and confusions? I'm hunting frantically to find something cheerful. Okay, first I guess I have to write it. I once wasted about 10 minutes of a reading looking for a particular poem. You know, I'm going through book after book, and finally it dawned on me, I never finished it. I never really wrote it. I wrote notes for it again and again, but I couldn't get it. And someday I hope I will get it. Let me read one about California, or at least situated in the Central Valley, and where I live, the Great Central Valley, which is a terrible place. High unemployment, wretched air, poisoned water. I love the place. It's like Detroit in the country. I feel so comfortable there. This is called gospel. And as you know, the word means the good news. And it takes place in the Sierras, or on the way to the high Sierras. They're close to Fresno, so it has that. But if you can't stand the air, you can drive up there. And in an hour, you'll be above the smog. And then I'll take some questions, which I probably won't answer, but I'll try. If I'm not trying, I'll let you know. You don't need to be told that. No, I'll try. Gospel. The new grass rising in the hills, the cows loitering in the morning chill, a dozen or more old browns hidden in the shadows of the cottonwoods. Beside the stream bed, I go higher to where the road gives up and there's only a faint path strewn with lupin between the mountain oaks. I don't ask myself what I'm looking for. I didn't come for answers to a place like this. I came to walk on the earth, still cold, still silent. Still ungiving, I've said to myself, although it greets me with last year's dead thistles and this year's hard spines, early blooming wild onions, the curling remains of spider's claw. What did I bring to the dance? In my back pocket, a crushed letter from a woman I've never met bearing bad news I can do nothing about. So I wander these woods half sightless while a west wind picks up in the trees clustered above. The pines make a music like no other, rising and falling like a distant surf at night that calms the darkness before first light. Soughing, we call it, from Old English, no less. How weightless words are when nothing will do. Thank you. You've been very generous with your applause. Now ask me a couple of impossible questions and I will give you possible answers. Yes, ma'am. Oh, beginning. Oh, there's a mic. No, I can. She asked me to talk about my beginnings as a poet and what or who inspired me. I began writing poetry when I was about 13 or 14. And I can't say that there was any poetry inspiring me. I had read Shakespeare and I had read Chaucer and a lot of mediocre poetry. Poetry was not as well taught then in the public schools as it is now. The teachers shied away from anything from the 20th century. And someone like Chaucer or someone like Shakespeare is totally intimidating. But I heard language used on the radio that really I found wondrous. And it was on Sunday morning in Detroit. There were a great many Southerners who moved to Detroit, you know, for war work. And they had these little radio stations where they, you know, you would get religious programs, where they would encant their sermons in a language of great richness and a rhetoric of richness. And I loved both black and white preachers that I just loved. I used to listen to them. My mom said, "Why are you listening to that?" I said, "It's educational." Because I'm Jewish, I mean, it was a little stunning. And I lived in a house that was very tumultuous. We were always yelling at each other. And my father died when I was very young, and so my two brothers and I had, in a way, to kind of run the house to a certain degree, and so sometimes we even cooked dinner. My mom worked full time. She'd come back home and be tired, and we'd wash the dishes and yell at each other. And so for a little peace and quiet, I would go out into woods, because when the war broke out, where we had moved, there was a freeze on housing. Everything went into war work, and it was a war, and sacrifices had to be made. And so I'd go out into these empty fields, climb trees, and one day I just started speaking to the universe. And it was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done, and it led me into poetry. My inspiration, I would say, the first great inspiration was the British World War I poet, Wilfred Owen. A teacher when I was in the 11th grade and the war was going, and I was 17 years old, waiting for the draft, loaned me a book of Owen's poems, and I made a discovery that in not wanting to kill or be killed, I shared that with this British poet who did die. And, you know, whereas the public arts were telling us, films, radio, whatever, and books, that it was a great honor to die for your country, Owen was saying, no one should be here. He's a great poet. He was my first, I would say overall the greatest influences on me have been Whitman, William Carlos Williams. Technically, I owe a great deal to, I would say, Thomas Wyatt, Keats, Owen, and William Carlos Williams. He's the biggest influence. And I'm inspired by poetry that I read constantly. Yes, Miss? I'm sorry? Are you talking about your struggle or the struggle of young people? Not that you're not young, but you said you were a teacher, so.
Yes.
But are you really talking about yourself or your students?
I want them to not only appreciate it, but also to be able to write it, to put that into words.
I think it's a mistake. If they want to write it, let them write it. There is so much poetry, good, bad, and mediocre in the world. So I would urge them to try it, but don't lean on it. There are people who would stand up here and say you are an incomplete person if you don't love and write poetry. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. Some people just don't connect with poetry. They have every right to say, I'd rather watch those birds than look at a book of poems. As Blake says, how do we know that every bird that cuts the airy way is not an immense world delight, closed by my senses five? Thank you, birds. You can go now. You've done your job. You lead people to this stuff, and if they take it, they take it. Then you take them to painting, dance, composition, music, jazz, classical, theater, novels, what have you. Now, if there's nothing that gets to them, they're in trouble. I mean, I remember as a kid, I used to take my mom. She wanted to go see ballet. She loved ballet. She was short and a little thick, and she just admired seeing these tall, thin women dance. And so I would take her, and I actually kind of got to like it. At first, I poo-pooed it. I thought, oh, Ma, what are we wasting our money for? But I kind of, as the English say, twigged to it, picked up on it. It's a mistake to tell people, if you don't like poems, you're missing something. Your soul is secretly and obviously damaged. No, you just don't like poetry. 2 minutes. One more question? Yes.
I just had a quick question. Who would you say you write for? People or yourself or dead poets?
Oh, not just dead poets. Dead plumbers, dead... especially dead electricians. I'm so dependent upon electricity. Old as I am, I did grow up in a house with electricity. I could do without telephones, but not electricity. I don't know who I write for. When I sit down to write a poem, I'm not thinking about anybody. I'm thinking about what's on the page and how to make it half-assed decent. To make it make sense, to make the words happy to be together, meeting in this line for the first time. I'll introduce them to each other. I'm really hell-bent to delight language and to delight myself. If it goes out into the world and has a little bit of a career, that's terrific. And now many of the poems do. But I'm not thinking about other people when I'm writing. I'm trying to think about what I'm writing. And so I don't have any time for the other 3 billion people on the planet. They can think about their poems. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.